I'm Zhoulan Xu, a business reporter with China Daily. Today we have invited David Blair, Vice President and Senior Economist for the Center for China and Globalization. China's economy will maintain its stability this year.
I don't see any reason not. It's really important where that growth goes, who benefits. One thing I noticed is that a lot of Chinese people know a lot about the United States. Very few Americans know anything about China.
To begin with, I'd like to start with the topic of opening up, considering that China has promised in December to further opening up at the institutional level. So from your point of view, what will be the most important progress in opening up for China this year?
So that kind of opening up, I think, is critical. I think many of the reforms that were necessary to make the economy friendly for foreign companies have already been announced. What's really important, I think, is being sure that these reforms are enforced throughout the country. I think the most important thing to them is being sure that local governments enforce the rules that the central government has already announced. I think also opening up is a good thing for Chinese economy, is a good thing for the world, because China is a large and growing market. So anybody that produces anything in the world would like to sell it here. Opening up to foreign companies that want to sell goods in the Chinese consumer market provides a lot of benefit to other countries, but it also makes goods cheaper and better in China. I think you're going to see continuing complaints from a lot of foreign companies about operating in China. And there's some legitimate complaints, obviously, but a lot of that is that they're not used to operating in such a highly competitive market. I mean, you see companies look at some of the tech companies that operate here that came from the US, like Amazon, eBay, there are a few others, and they failed in the Chinese market. Why do they fail? It's because they're used to operating in a very monopolized market. They come here, they just can't compete. They're going to complain that it's something that the government's doing to them, but bottom line, their product is not as good and they just can't compete.
I think high competition is a good thing. And you have mentioned that there are some things that local governments should really put into place.
Yes.
Yeah, what the central government have said. So at the moment right now, which policy, opening up policy, should local governments really put into place?
Well, the most important rule is national treatment. I mean, that a foreign firm should be treated exactly the way a domestic firm should be treated, in access to raw materials, in access to markets, in access to consumers, maybe into financing. All those things are important.
Yeah, so you have mentioned national treatment, which has also been mentioned at the Central Economic Work Conference.
Mm-hmm.
So I think China has been trying to ensure national treatment for many years. So for now, how to really ensure national treatment? What is the remaining obstacles to really achieve that goal in China right now?
What I've heard from talking to some local businesses operating, especially not in big cities, but even near some big cities, some companies feel that the local government is not treating them the same way it treats other local firms. So I think being sure that this rule is respected and enforced throughout the country is really important.
So do you think China's economy will maintain its stability this year?
I don't see any reason not. Exports have been strong. They're not going to continue growing at the rate they did because trees don't grow to the sky. And also China's economy. China, as I mentioned, it grew at close to 9% per year for 40 years. Well, you're big now. China's economy is big. If you're small, you can grow at a high rate. But if you're big, you can't grow at such a high rate. If China's exports grew at the rate they grew last year for many more years, they're going to take over all the exports in the world. That's not going to happen. But growing at 5% a year, that's a big accomplishment, especially if that's real growth rather than financial growth.
Yeah, so we have talked about economic growth for China. So what kind of economic growth target do you think is reasonable for China this year?
I think the number 5% sticks in my head as being reasonable. If a country can continue to grow at 5% a year, that's really an amazing accomplishment. So if an economy is growing at 5% per year, it means in only 14 years it's going to be double the size that it is now. That's amazing. Especially, one thing that I want to emphasize, it's really important where that growth goes, who benefits. It's really important that average people's wages go up, that they benefit from it. If you ask me, the key problem in my own country, in the United States, is that there have been zero increase in real wages since 1979. Zero in median real wages. The percentage of the national GDP that goes to workers has declined by about 10% over that period. We've had GDP growth, but no increase in wages. That's a very, very bad thing for the economy. If you get average people's incomes growing, it does a lot of things. First of all, it forces companies to move up market. If you've got a lot of cheap labor, you can just keep using that cheap labor and produce cheap products. But if you've got expensive labor, it means you have to develop new technology and develop better products. Also, it creates demand for those products because people have wages, they can buy it. And it's also a better society if you have wealth spread among average people rather than concentrated in a few rentier monopolists.
I can relate to the common prosperity pursuit of the
Exactly,
Chinese
yeah.
government.
Yeah, the term common prosperity, I think that's really an important thing. You don't want to head down this road where you got a small number of monopolistic people or people with, like we're seeing in the United States, with political ties getting rich through corruption or something like that, and then average people not getting any benefits.
So maybe you agreeing with China's efforts to China's antitrust efforts and regulation on capital expansion.
Yeah. I think absolutely. Especially the big tech firms have been able to operate monopolistic markets, and there are many examples where they either bought a potential competitor. Facebook did this repeatedly with WhatsApp and with Instagram. Google has done it many times with YouTube and with AdSense. Or they copy the small company's product and kill them. And they have the first mover advantage, so they've got a lot of assets, so they can do that. This has been very damaging throughout the economy. I mean, Amazon is a key example. Amazon uses lots of anti-competitive processes, and it's killed lots of small businesses around the country. There's a recent court case that showed that Amazon was they told their the companies that sell through them, through Amazon Marketplace, if you offer a lower product on another sales venue, we will kick you off our market. And since they control more than 50% of the market, that's a real threat. So they've managed to keep prices high because of that.
So there are some discussions about decoupling and also recoupling. So do you think there remain ample space for cooperation that will be able to avoid China and US from decoupling from each other in the long term?
I think this is not necessarily a bad thing. So if the US decides to deny China access to the leading computer chips, there will be a strong incentive for Chinese companies to produce those computer chips. So in the long term, it may be beneficial to the Chinese and to the world markets. It's good to have more producers. So I'm not sure the strategy of denying access to the technology really, I don't think it can work in the long term. It will cause short-term pain. I mean, there's been a lot of short-term pain to Huawei's profits, for example. But I don't think it can be successful in the long term. I'm not saying this is a good thing necessarily, but my guess is that from the American point of view, the strategy will fail. It's a bad strategy.
Yeah, so as an economics, do you still hope that China and US can really have a better economic tie with each other?
Absolutely, because not only for economic reasons, but for the future of the world. I mean, it's a continued animosity between China and the United States is a very, very, very bad. And I hate to see that continuing. I think one thing I noticed is that a lot of Chinese people know a lot about the United States. A lot of you all traveled the world and that kind of stuff. Very few Americans know anything about China. I mean, one thing that really drives me crazy is that you see on American TV, someone will come on often, billed as a China expert, and he doesn't know the way to pronounce the family name of the president of the country, which raises a lot of problems. So the more American businessmen who are operating here and living here and know what life is really like in China would be a really good thing, I think, for Chinese-American relations. I think a lot of people have very, very little idea average people's life is like in China, and many have the wrong impression.
Okay, you mentioned that opening the Chinese market is one way that can help China and the US build a tighter economic ties with each other. So from your perspective, how do you think that American companies are operating in China here? Are they performing in a good condition or not?
There are lots of surveys that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and people like that have done. I think they're, if I remember the surveys, they're largely profitable, which means that's good. A lot of them, for some of them, it's a very large market. There are a few big firms that are making a lot of money here. Also, for a lot of consumer products, you see some types of foods, fast foods, sort of soaps and things like that are sold a lot in China. So that provides a lot of ties.
There is also a question that can China remain attractive for multinationals because maybe the interest rates in the US may grow up, which may make the Chinese market less attractive?
Don't be fooled. You have to look at real interest rates, not nominal interest rates. You need to subtract the rate of inflation from the nominal interest rate to get the real interest rate. So if the dollar rate of inflation is 8%, say, and the interest rate is 3%, say, you're getting negative 5% return on your dollar. That's not a high rate of interest. So investors are smart. They know this. Also, I mean, I think because of the factors we've talked about earlier, because of rising inflation and probable recession, the U.S. and the European markets are likely to be less attractive. I mean, for selling stuff in the future. And China it's a big consumer market now. I mean, if I'm producing any kind of consumer good, I have to be here. I can't just write off that market. I don't think changing the interest rates in the United States will have a big effect on the Chinese domestic economy.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your brilliant ideas. And I think ensure that which are evenly growing will be one of the key topics for China in the coming years, based on our discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.